Why is defense winning over the past decade? And that runs contrary to what a lot of people think, because people still remember when the rule changes happened. Peyton Manning had issues. The NFL changed things, opened it up. And you hear fans talk, it seems as though they think that it's still the high scoring days. But as you've written about, scoring has dropped. Why, when everybody has access to information, is it the defense that's getting the better of the offense, even though I think the league would want more scoring to happen?
Well, that second part is a loaded question. We could talk about that. But I think that there is a lot of it really started to me, I guess, with Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill back in 2018, 2019. We were at a time when passing was everybody was passing the football. Defenses played a lot of man coverage, and they were putting up so many points. And obviously, we had years where offenses scored at different points in time. Remember, like the 2007 Patriots that went undefeated until the Super Bowl with Randy Moss and Tom Brady. A lot of deep field, quick scores. But the defenses have made their adjustments. And it became difficult that first year after the defenses made their adjustments. I want to say it might have been like 2019, 2020, somewhere in that neighborhood. We saw some of these offenses take step backs, and it took a little while for them to then make some adjustments and get a little bit back on track, but they never got fully back on track. Now, the one year that's the anomaly is 2020, because there were no crowds in the stands due to COVID. And that one season, we saw road offensive scoring explode compared to norms. And as a result of road offensive scoring, we saw more games going over the total. We saw more, offensive statistics being put up. Just in general, it was easier for those offenses to operate and make audibles at the line of scrimmage because there's no crowd there, so they can communicate. They can snap the ball as close to, that play clock getting down to zero as they want without fear. Whereas normally, a crowd is going to start getting louder and louder the closer you get down to zero and try to snap the ball. You're going to have more false start penalties. You're going to have more offensive holding penalties due to lack of communication, things of that nature. Those things really went down. Scoring went up that one year of 2020. But now it's been in a little bit of decline. Now, I wrote a lot about why last season started off really poorly. I frankly don't know what's going on with NFL officiating of late. It used to be, and this is one of the things that I study a little bit more than probably the average person, just because I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. And I need to be aware of everything that is going on. But it used to be that you could see they would come up with their desired rules changes in the offseason. They would get proposed. Those rules would either get passed or they would not. And then they would become implemented, and then you could see the impact. But we are seeing more, whether it's official emphasis, rules emphasis this year, or it's unofficial. They aren't announcing it, but they're just suddenly calling more of it, like we started last season with. All of a sudden, they're just going to call a bunch of ineligible man downfield penalties, 3-4 times more than we had seen in the first 5-6 weeks of the season than we had seen in any of the years past. It's like, this was not an official emphasis. There was no press release on this. We did not know that this was going to be coming out, and it was impacting scoring. And so I got really detailed into that, as well as some of the other penalties that were either being called or not being called compared to average years. And eventually scoring got back on track a little bit. But you're right, it is still down, and it's because of the way the defenses are playing right now. Preventing those big plays with the cover 2 zone defenses that are keeping everything in front of them. And they're trying to make the offense eventually make a mistake. If you have a 4-play drive down the field because you gained 30 yards in one play and you're scoring the ball from the 15-yard line, let's pretend, there's only 4 times that you could potentially make an error on that drive. Whereas if you have a 10-play drive, all the defense has to do really is win one of those plays to really set the offense back. Like you talked about, a sack, drive killer. The rate of scoring dips by a massive amount when you record a sack. An offensive holding penalty. Offensive holding is actually more likely to be called on a run play than a pass play. But you get a coach calls a run play or sometimes a pass play, even because the defense gets to jump the line of scrimmage, because guess what? They aren't calling defensive offsides nearly as much as they once did. And then all of a sudden that offensive lineman has to hold a little bit. And these defensive players, they're getting a lot more athletic than they were years ago. They're faster, they're quicker, they're able to get after the quarterback, and the offense has to react with a shorter time to do so. You get one holding, that's almost as good as a sack, because it's 10 yards, but you do get to repeat the down. These are penalties that end up hurting a lot as well. So defenses want these offenses to take their time marching the ball down the field, as many plays as possible before they end up trying to score, so that you can sneak one good defensive play in there. And offenses haven't really found their counterpunch to that. And I don't know that I see it coming this season either, to be honest with you. I don't think that we're going to see a big boom in offensive scoring this year, but I hope that some of these guys have some more tricks up their sleeve, because I always love seeing what Kyle Shanahan comes out with, or Mike McDaniel comes out with, these different things that they end up introducing the first couple of weeks of the season. I'm really eager to see what they bring out this season, because we certainly haven't seen it in the preseason. This has been one of the worst preseasons I can remember, just boring, mundane football.
Yeah, it hasn't been exciting. I wonder if the NFL found itself in this situation because they didn't want too many offensive or defensive pass interference calls, because that doesn't feel too good. It doesn't feel earned when there's a play 40 yards down the field and then a flag is thrown and there was no completion and maybe the wide receiver flopped and it's rewarded with this massive penalty. So just, it looks like not as many of those are happening, and that will benefit the defense. And I think that there's some uneasiness with that, with calling that one in particular. And speaking of this boring preseason and Kyle Shanahan, I was just looking at some clips of the fairly, let's just say rough Brock Purdy preseason, getting your feet wet outing. And what I noticed was that wide receivers down the field, they're slipping and falling because they're just getting bumped and manhandled. And I'm not an expert enough on what the rules are. Maybe it was in accordance with the rules. I'm not saying that it was called incorrectly, but that to me, I just would highlight that as, hey, if they call that more stringently, fans will be frustrated because there will be these flags and these huge penalties, but that's probably the only realistic, easy way to suddenly boost scoring to back where it was.
Well, yeah, what they've done this preseason is crazy to me. Today, I wrote an article doing a deep dive because we saw the second week of preseason games, and we don't know what's going to happen yet. The coaches are starting to announce, are we playing our starters in week 3, which is the final week of preseason, or are we not? We know that there's only 3 weeks of preseason. There used to be 4, so teams were used to doing things a little bit differently in the past. But through the first 2 weeks of preseason this year compared to last year, the year before that, and I have access to data in preseason going back to 2017, we are seeing, I want to say it's like 15 points per game on average by these offenses, which is the lowest that we have seen. We are seeing massive inefficiency from these offenses. It starts with the quarterback position. Now, understandable, they're sitting some of their starting quarterbacks, but they've been doing that in years past also. Might be a slightly higher rate, but it's not substantially higher. We are seeing offensive coaches, play callers not care as much. I mean, like Kyle gave up play calling. I think in his last preseason game, we were seeing that happening a fair amount around the league. Some of these head coaches just don't want to deal with the stress. They also want to reward their offensive coordinator, give him an opportunity to go out there and call some plays so that if he's in a job interview, he could say he's actually done it before. So we've seen that, and that's a factor as well. But a lot of it is these penalties. And to your point, like with Brock Purdy, I'll just outline some of the stats that I've pulled. 39% decline in defensive pass interference calls this year versus the average in the last 6 years. Wow. We have seen only 21 of those called through 2 weeks. Same number of games, 32 games. Only 21 of them this year. We've seen 35 per year in the past. In terms of defensive pass interference yardage, in the past, we saw 612 yards of total yards per year in these first 2 weeks of preseason. 612. This year, we're only at 337. So that's a massive decline as well in terms of DPI yardage that's being called. We're seeing a lot less defensive holding, 24% decline in defensive holding penalties. And then I already mentioned the offsides penalties. We've seen a decline in roughing the passer penalties. Both of those are around a 50% decline year over year. And total defensive penalties is down massively, whereas penalties on the offensive side of the ball, we have not seen that decline. We have not seen a decline in total offensive penalties. I want to say we were at 228 in the past several years, the past 6 years. This year we were at 222. So 6 less out of 228 that we've been down. I want to say this like a couple percent. So we are not seeing a decrease on the offensive side, but a massive decrease on the defensive side. It has led to this lower scoring. To your point, one of the big issues that I had last year with the way that these games were being officiated is that the way that they were calling the penalties was helping the defenses. It was keeping these games closer is keeping these games lower scoring. But what we weren't seeing was closer games. We actually saw more lopsided games. The way that they were calling these penalties really helps the better defense and really hurts the offense that's going up against them. And so we are seeing like your average to below average offenses not really being able to score very many points against decent defenses. And the scores would be like, the final score of the game, 23-6, 23-9. The games like this, which aren't all that exciting. They're not that compelling. They're lower scoring. So we saw record numbers of unders come in from a betting perspective, but a record number of favorites covering the spreads. Underdogs were not having the opportunities to win games outright or cover the spreads last season, the way that these games started. And we're sort of trending in that same direction this preseason. And I don't understand why. Like I'm in the process because I just did this analysis, literally wrote this article this morning. I got to start talking to some people around the league to try to understand, was there an edict that was handed out by the league to reduce these? Because you make a good point that potentially they don't want the fans to get really upset. What are a couple of the real easy reactions that fans have to penalties? It's roughing the passer and it's DPI that gives a team like 30, 40 yards. Like those are the two that are just like, oh my God, they show the replays really close. They zoom in 4K and sometimes they could be right or wrong. Maybe they're trying to reduce those types because those are some of the ones that they're dropping down on tremendously this preseason. But I think the way that I view penalties, I don't know how about you viewed them from your basketball days, but I want the rule book. If you don't like a rule any longer, get it out of the rule book. I want to understand what the rules are. I want my players to be coached on, hey, let's try to push it to the edge. Maybe we go past the edge, but we understand what the rules are and how they're going to enforce it. And I know each referee does it a little bit differently. This is why we track ref data. We understand what refs are more likely to call what types of penalties and where it could give different coaches advantages and try to talk to some of those guys in those certain situations. But I just want to know what's expected here so that we can watch the games and not overreact to things. The coaches can tell their players what to expect. And we, when we're like betting on these games, know what to expect as well.
Yeah, I think I want the rule to be called according to the letter with some human interpretation. It would drive me crazy in basketball when James Harden would obviously flop and the ref would shrug and go, well, according to the letter. I mean, if you're seeing somebody trying to initiate the contact, I think there is a little bit of calling something according to the spirit, but you often hear praise for swallowing the whistle. How often do you hear an announcer go, they're letting them play, and saying that that's a good thing? And I think fans would say that they want that in the discrete example, but maybe not in the aggregate when it leads to all this drop in scoring.